Hi there, everybody. Welcome to Fresh Outlook, the show where we're talking about what you're talking about. I'm your host, Taryn Brill, but just call me TWB. Well, with the presidential election getting closer and closer, everyone is talking politics, and of course, that includes us. So on today's show, we'll begin by tackling the latest presidential debate. Was there a clear winner? That's the question. Then we're going to turn the discussion to voter ID laws. It's a hot topic right now that could significantly impact the outcome of the election. From there, we'll take on education reform, from budget cuts that are rampant throughout school districts across the country, and the recent teacher strike in Chicago. It's an issue that presidential candidates really disagree on, the two of them. Finally, did you hear that Newsweek is going digital? I just heard yesterday. Pretty soon, you won't be able to pick up that copy at the newsstand. So is it a sign of things to come? Before we get the conversation started, let's meet our all-star panel once again. Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, we should say.
Good afternoon.
Let's start with WJ. Who are you? Where are you from?
I'm WJ O'Reilly. I'm the headmaster of the Panelists School in New Jersey.
All right, welcome. James?
I'm James Braxton Peterson. I'm the Director of Africana Studies at Lehigh University and a contributor to thegrio.com.
JBP, as I like to call you, WJ, and FM, Francesca?
We're alphabet soup here. I'm Francesca Marguerite Maximé. I am a news anchor here at Every TV and also the author of a new book called Rooted.
Terrific. Love the glasses.
Thank you.
Very, very cool.
I was just thinking that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good thoughts. All right, well, before we get into voter ID laws, let's talk about the presidential debate, rather. Elections coming up. Took place at Hofstra University in Hempstead, New York, just a couple days ago. Let's get everyone's take on it. Was there a clear winner? Was there something specific from each candidate that was a highlight for you? James, let's start with you.
Well, it was clear that the president prepared differently and asserted himself in a different way in the second debate. I think for his base, his followers, and for the Democratic Party, it was a clear victory in the sense that he was assertive, he got his points across, and I think he won the day on certain issues. He didn't win on every issue in the debate, but he won the day on the key issues of the debate.
Okay, WJ, what do you say?
Yeah, I think clearly President Obama was able to kind of rebound from that disastrous effort of a couple of weeks ago. But on the other hand, who's going to switch their vote because of a debate? Let's be honest about it. I don't think he actually changed anybody's mind about anything, but he did save his own reputation, which is very important.
Yeah, he seemed very presidential to me. What do you think, Francesca?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Obama came out on top in that debate. It's sort of 1 and 1, right? Romney got the first one, Obama got this round, and we'll see what happens on Monday.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he rebounded. I like what Romney did. He kept emphasizing the fact of, look at his record. Do we want another 4 years? Do we want another 4 years? But the president came back. He was smoking him, in my opinion. Specifically, I liked the highlight when he kept saying, you're cutting Planned Parenthood. You're cutting Planned Parenthood. And truth be told, I missed the end of the debate. My TiVo failed me, and I didn't know if they got to that. Did Mitt Romney ever address his feelings on Planned Parenthood and how he will cut it? Do you guys remember that specifically?
No, he didn't. He did not.
Okay.
He did not get to that. And in fact, they didn't. You know, the really big blow up was around women's issues.
Right.
And what was interesting is although the president got a chance to talk about the Lilly Ledbetter Act, and we got to the whole sort of binders full of women comment. That's
ridiculous.
Binders of women.
Mistakes like that.
Well, exactly, right? And in fact, the conversation was like a retrograde conversation. Women have been in the workforce for a long time, and Mr. Romney's been working in politics and in business for a long time, so I think that particular comment struck folk the wrong way.
Yes, but was there something that you would have liked to ask them that wasn't asked that night? Francesca?
You know, I am probably in the minority on this, but among my friends, we do want to hear about climate change and the environment, and we do want to hear about not just the coal production and, you know, the drill. Yeah, you know, and the $500 billion that are still going to be sunken into fossil fuel costs over the upcoming years, and just about, you know, failed Solyndra and green energy potentially creating jobs under Obama's plan. Those are good things, but what we really want to talk about is the future for our children and how it starts now. I mean, there's a new documentary that's out about the glaciers that are all, you know, just falling apart, and really it's sort of documenting this climate change. And you know, Al Gore made it a political issue when he came out from the Democratic end and then sort of embraced this idea of climate change, and a lot of people were against the idea of it because it became politicized. It didn't just stay in the scientific realm, and that's unfortunate, I think. So I would have liked to see them address it.
Unfortunately, it did not serve Al Gore well politically to talk about climate change, and it would not have served either of these presidential candidates to talk about it either.
Why is that?
Because it's too political. It's actually too. It's too.
Is that an oxymoron?
Then why is it being talked about? Why not? I say that there's a tacit agreement between them not to go there because it doesn't serve either of them.
I thought the same thing about gun control, but gun control came up. I thought the same thing about immigration, but immigration came up. Climate. Listen, the EPA was founded by Nixon. right? So the fact that climate change is somehow partisan now shows us how jacked up our politics are. This is something that's about that everyone should be invested in. And it's certainly, I agree with Francesca, it's an issue that needs to be on the platform and part of the presidential debate.
We'll see what happens on Tuesday.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, guys, we got to change gears for a moment. Right now, I'd like to turn the discussion to voter ID laws, an extremely hot topic because of the fact that this issue alone can significantly impact the outcome of the election. Take a look.
The U.S. takes pride in its commitment to democracy. But now, as the 2012 election draws even nearer, some say that new voter ID laws in many states could prevent millions from entering the polls. Supporters claim the laws are needed to combat voter fraud, but critics see them as a tactic to suppress basic rights. Their argument, the majority of those without ID are minorities, the elderly, and low-income persons, Americans that have traditionally voted for the Democratic Party.
That is discrimination because it affects especially minority population. And second is because they're doing it just on purpose to come out at this injuncture of the elections.
Currently, state and federal courts are weighing in on the measures, as many wonder what impact they'll have come election time, especially in pivotal swing states.
All right, guys, so let's begin with a brief overview and some stats and familiarize our audience. That is, 33 states have enacted voter ID laws in some form. Strictness varies from state to state, in terms of showing a photo ID versus a non-photo ID. Indiana, Georgia, Tennessee, Kansas, Pennsylvania, South Carolina have the strictest versions, meaning you need a valid photo ID. Keep in mind, though, in some of these states like South Carolina and Pennsylvania, implementation has been postponed until after this election, which obviously Obama has come out and saying that that's a good thing. A lot of controversy over these laws, pros and cons. Where do we stand, panel? Are you for these voter ID laws or not? James, I'll start with you.
Absolutely
You
against
are.
it, particularly
you're
because
against
of,
it. Okay.
Absolutely against voter ID laws, particularly because of the timing of it. So honestly, if you look at what's been happening, you'll find that it's been Republican legislatures and Republican governors that have been instituting these laws in the run-up to this presidential election. Part of it because of the data they're getting from 2010 elections is that their demographic, their base is shrinking while the Democratic base is growing. And so, so to me, this is too political. If we really are interested in this as a policy, we've got to do it after the presidential election because that just makes it less political and I think much more effective. At the end of the day, though some 5 million people who are going to be affected by these laws are largely Democratic voters. It's a big victory in the state of PA, big victory in the state of Ohio, which got early voting in, and the Justice Department working with Supreme Court in the state of Pennsylvania actually decided.
I mean, could you imagine how the election could have been different if it wasn't postponed?
Pennsylvania could swing, and Ohio's so up for grabs, it would have definitely impacted Ohio as well. So it's important for us not to try to change the rules at the very last minute, especially if it disproportionately impacts one side of the political equation. So let's have this discussion after the presidential election. Let's find a way to do it.
We will,
but let's find a way to do it in such a way that we're supporting folk to get IDs. We shouldn't, everyone's like, oh, we all have IDs, right? Why can't you just, there are some folk who can't afford to order their birth certificates, who don't have cars and can't drive to get to the DMV. It's a privilege to have an ID in this country, and so this issue is really important.
Should you be penalized if you can't afford a driver's license and I don't drive, let's say? WJ, what do you say?
Much as it may surprise you, I agree with you on that. But that being said, obviously those who would be disenfranchised by these kinds of laws that would be enacted would be those who would vote Democratic. We all know that. I think it's also no surprise to me that this particular question is not being acted upon now because there's a Democrat in the White House.
That's right.
And I think for as long as the Democrats hold the White House, this will not be an issue to affect those who might vote for the Democrats. But what about all this voter fraud? Voter fraud does exist in this country.
So
you've got people who actually, excuse me, James, let me finish. There are people out there who are signing up as dead people, people who are no longer traceable on the rolls and voting multiple times.
Yeah,
this does happen.
So is this how you cure it?
I don't know.
Is this a solution?
It is.
What are the stats?
Do
you know them?
The stats are a fraction.
You love to agree and disagree.
A lot of people.
I'm just saying there's fraud everywhere. We saw in Nassau County and northern Long Island that there was the SAT cheating scandal last year. I mean, people will be duplicating other people's efforts, left and right, regardless. I just think that for it to be a politicized issue, it's sort of like all of the money going into the Supreme Court right now. People are now trying to influence and buy the Supreme Court. That's part of the whole
lobbyists.
Yes, I mean you're getting money to sort of buy these votes now, and in that way it's a politicized thing with the Democrats and the Republicans. I think that you will see disenfranchised minorities, elderly, poor people that are going to want to vote but aren't going to be able to,
get
what happens
voter fraud is small in terms. It's a very small percentage in terms of impact. We can talk about all the conspiracy theories about Acorn and about other organizations, sort of driving vote.
Conspiracy theories.
Yes,
wow.
yes.
Elvis is in on this one.
That's another show.
Listen, but the bottom line is what we know.
Yes.
It's a very, very small impact on our
But
elections.
James, what's going to happen if Mitt Romney wins the White House? And it's a coin toss today. It's a
Listen,
coin toss.
we've
What
already
happens
had
when
those
he
elections,
wins
though.
when he wins
It
the
is.
White
Yes.
House, and then suddenly pressure is brought to bear upon people on this ID
Francesca,
question?
we didn't
Then
get
what?
we didn't get Francesca. So what's your? Do you support or
No, I
do
mean,
you not
I-
support these laws?
She's so demure today. She's
I want an answer, miss.
Sorry, I have a cold.
new
I'm a little bit
persona.
sick. Yeah, it's
Blah, blah, blah.
Hey, I know. I was a little ringer last week.
It's working.
Hey,
Go with
Yeah,
it.
but where do you stand?
What can I say? No, bottom line is I think that clearly, as long as it's a legal form of identification, it doesn't necessarily need to be a government-issued particular form of identification. To get into these, nitty-gritty, smaller, granular parts of it that do end up just segmenting out a certain amount of the population that would otherwise be likely to vote a particular way based on their particular predisposed conditions, elderly, minority,
But what if it were
socioeconomically-
Episcopalians and white bankers that they were screening out
They've
by
already
some
gotten
requirement
them,
of
but-
voting?
yeah.
They're not.
no.
And again, those are the folk that have IDs.
Well, look,
right.
And listen, I'm all for, let's make it the law that everyone has to have an ID.
We can
Right.
But let's
standard-
do it at a time.
I think we can
when it's not so
standardize
far away.
Let's not rush
I
it.
hear you.
Standardize it in an impartial way.
Exactly.
That's
It's
all.
very convenient that it's all
Yes.
coming out now. Let's just talk about some of the stats, though. Nationwide, the New York Times estimates the laws could decrease voter turnout between 8 and 2.4%. This could swing the election, obviously, as we've been
Obviously
saying,
it
in
could.
favor of
There's
Mitt
no question
Romney, as
about it.
minorities seem to be the ones most affected by this, and that's who Obama needs to win. So the question is, even though it's not going into effect in every state, some states it is in effect.
That's right.
Should Obama be worried? If you're Obama, are you worried about this, or are you saying, it's really not going to affect me?
Well, I'm sure he's concerned about it from a civil rights perspective. He's not going to politicize it. The Justice Department, his Justice Department, has been investigating each state. That's how we got the win in Ohio. That's how South Carolina was kind of challenged to delay there. So he's not going to politicize it. But certainly, again, after the presidential election, let's have the conversation. Let's figure out what's really at stake here and start to make the move. And again, give the people the time to get the IDs and give them the support to get the IDs.
Not so much a question of whether or not he's concerned or worried about it. The question is the Obama machine on it?
They're on it. They've been on it for a while.
I suspect
Yeah,
so.
are
They've
they
been on
on
it for a
it?
while.
They better
Yes,
be on
they've been on it
I'm
for
concerned.
a while. They have.
I'm
Okay.
concerned.
I'm concerned. I mean, do you remember when we had the first electronic voting machines? Do you remember that and that whole
Hanging
debacle
widgets and-
Chads.
and Chads?
Yeah, we've
and
had
things?
toss-up
You know,
elections already.
I'm
Yeah.
just saying. I mean, there have been other issues as well in terms of voter registration, vote casting that have been severely impacting elections
Incidentally, that's where a lot of
previously.
the fraud is in voter registration.
Yeah, and so I think that if you're going to look at things like IDs, you need to look with equal interest at things like the technology with which we're voting now today, and how equitable is that, and what are the checks there that are put in place to make sure that there isn't fraud or any other kind of wrongdoing there.
Right. Well, I do want to bring up a topic because I want to make sure we get to it. Should voting be mandatory? Okay. 35% of eligible voters in the U.S. are not registered to vote. Okay. Some countries around the world make it mandatory. Should we make it mandatory? How do we feel about
I
that?
love
Free
that
country,
idea.
free country.
No,
you're free to move up and down in social strata in this country. You're free to vote or not vote.
I actually love this idea. I know it's never going to happen in this country, but I think it's civic responsibility. People died for the right to vote. Women, people of color, poor folk were in movements for scores of years to get access to the vote, and I think it should be your civic duty and responsibility to vote. It's not going to happen here, but I would
Right.
love
I mean,
to
we
see
don't
it.
have the draft anymore, but at least you can vote. I think that you can register, making registering to vote a mandatory function, and whether or
agree
not
with
you
that.
actually go to the polls, perhaps I'm a little bit more with WJ on that. You can elect to do so or not, given whatever your circumstance is at that time. But I do think that the idea of registering to vote is a mandatory one, is a good one.
But far more importantly is why don't people who have the freedom and have the opportunity to vote, why don't they?
Right.
apathy.
I probably just snatched the words out of your
Well,
mouth.
some of it
why don't
is
they?
apathy. A lot of it is that through the electoral college process and the ways that politics is sort of devolved into a lot of sort of back and forth and a lot of backbiting, people are disenchanted with the system. So at the presidential level, it's the electoral college that's confusing to some folks because it's not like your individual vote matters.
You've been wanting to talk about the electoral college for weeks. Why don't you go ahead and do it now?
Well, listen, it would be
nice
to have a national conversation about whether or not we could revise the electoral college or revise the presidential election system so that it was a little bit more democratic. I mean, we have faith in it that it works the way that it works, but for a lot of folk, especially if you think about how cynical we are about politics in general, it just
But I feel like people don't vote because they just don't like the candidates. I don't like either of them, so why am I going to vote for the best of the worst?
Because you're going to get stuck with one of them, so you might as well.
I mean, we had I can't support either.
Well, and you've seen a little bit of a push, like Ralph Nader with the third-party candidates coming in here and there, and you'll even see that in some local races, like in Maine, for example, where you have 3 candidates going at it. I think that the electoral college issue is a huge one because when you have states that are such swing states and you have super PACs that are pouring so much money into advertising into those specific states during the last month and weeks and days of any given election, especially, I mean, you have conservative groups buying ad time on BET in Ohio right now.
So what's the solution? I mean, should there be a limit?
Well, Citizens United has to go. We're not going to change the electoral college in our lifetimes. I really don't believe so. But we've got to overturn Citizens United.
I do want to ask you guys this, though. I want to talk about voting access in terms of America's prison population. So many inmates are unable to vote. You know, some countries allow it, some don't. Should we? I mean, there's so many. What do you got? If you're a criminal, should you not be able to vote?
Primarily in this country, inmates are black males. Predominantly.
Okay.
What's the percentage on that actually as of today?
It's disproportionate. We're 40% of the prison
So what does it matter?
population,
I don't care what color your skin is. If you're a felon, shouldn't you still be able to vote? I mean, what is one thing if I rob a bank, what does it have to do with me voting?
I mean, I think you should be able to vote regardless because I think that, if you're good enough to go to prison, you're good enough to cast a vote.
I think once you've paid your debt to society, once you've served your time, you should no longer be disenfranchised.
Yeah.
And here's the thing, and people don't understand this, a lot of folk who are in prison are essentially substance abusers. Like, we incarcerate so many folk, just not for dealing drugs, right? Not for selling drugs, but for using drugs.
It didn't used to be that way.
But it is that way.
No, I understand that, but that's because in the late 1960s and the early 1970s, they actually changed the laws in the country, and the funding, the government funding that went towards substance abuse treatment programs and mental illness treatment programs evaporated and went away, and instead what you saw was the privatization of prisons, and that's where you see all the federal funds that are now, instead of going to public schools and secondary education, being toward prisons because they can make more money that way.
We have 35 seconds left. We don't have time to get to everything, but I'm curious your thoughts. Voting online, should it be allowed in the United States? Yes or no? Should you be able to vote online?
If there is a way to do it securely, I would say sure.
Okay.
I have to say there can't be a way of doing it securely,
you don't think
therefore
so?
No.
Okay,
Right.
okay.
Yeah, until the encryption technology, I think, outpaces the hackers, we need to be very cautious about
I mean, they say that it'll obviously just encourage a lot more people in terms of voter turnout, but
I mean, but we trade billions of dollars
some
every
countries
day
do it.
online.
But should be able to vote as many times as possible, like American Idol too.
Right, exactly. We'll make the election Simon Cowell for president. All right, guys, we have to take a break. We're going from voter ID laws to education reform. The teacher strike in Chicago last month really brought the state of our nation's schools to the forefront, finally, and now many educators aren't happy. We'll discuss why and where the candidates stand. That's ahead after the break. You're watching Fresh Outlook.